My boss praised my work publicly, then denied me a raise privately using completely different reasons. I was staring at the email when my phone buzzed. Great work on the Meridian project, Adrian. Truly exceptional. That was my boss, David Sterling, CCing the entire executive team. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in his office watching him explain why I didn't deserve the raise I'd been promised 6 months ago. The disconnect wasn't just jarring, it was surgical. Every word of praise from that morning's all-hands meeting had been carefully selected to build me up in front of witnesses. Every word in this closed-door conversation was designed to tear me down where nobody could hear. I'd worked in corporate America long enough to recognize politics, but this felt different. This felt personal, calculated, and most disturbingly, practiced. When he finished his third contradictory reason for denying my raise, something clicked in my brain. This wasn't about my performance. This was about something else entirely, and I was going to find out what. I'd been at Horizon Solutions for 3 years when the Meridian project landed on my desk. It was the kind of high-stakes client engagement that could make or break careers, a complete systems overhaul for a Fortune 500 company with a timeline that made grown men weep. Sterling had assigned it to me on a Wednesday afternoon with what I'd interpreted as confidence. "You've got this, Adrian. Show me what you're made of." I'd spent the next 4 months working 60-hour weeks, managing a team of 8, coordinating with external vendors, and personally debugging code at 3 a.m. when deadlines loomed. My wife, Rebecca, had been patient about the late nights and weekend calls. "It'll pay off," I'd told her, believing every word. Sterling promised a substantial raise and promotion when this wraps up. The project launched on schedule, under budget, and exceeded every performance metric. The client sent a glowing testimonial. Sterling forwarded it to me with 3 words. "You earned this." The morning meeting had been a spectacle of public recognition. Sterling stood at the front of the conference room, clicked through slides showing the Meridian success story, and made sure everyone knew I'd been the lead. "Adrian Pearson went above and beyond. This is the standard we're setting going forward." There was applause. Colleagues I barely knew congratulated me in the hallway afterward. My team sent a group text celebrating. I'd felt vindicated, exhausted, and ready to finally have that compensation conversation we'd been postponing. When Sterling's calendar invite popped up for a one-on-one that same afternoon, I thought I knew what was coming. I'd mentally rehearsed how graciously I'd accept the raise, maybe negotiate the title bump. I'd even looked at new cars online during lunch, thinking about finally replacing my aging sedan. Walking into his office at 4 that afternoon, I was still riding the high of public validation. That feeling lasted approximately 90 seconds. Sterling closed the door, gestured to the chair across from his desk, and his entire demeanor shifted. The warm mentor from the meeting had been replaced by something colder, more bureaucratic. "About your compensation review," he started, not meeting my eyes. "I've been looking at the numbers, and unfortunately, we can't justify an increase right now." I remember my first thought being that he was joking, setting up some kind of surprise, but his expression didn't change. The Meridian project, while successful, didn't demonstrate the kind of leadership initiative we need at the next level. "You followed instructions well, but I didn't see innovation." I felt my stomach drop. Leadership initiative? I'd rebuilt the entire project timeline when the client changed specifications midstream. I'd mentored 2 junior developers who were now stars on other teams. I'd negotiated with vendors to save us nearly $80,000. "I'm confused," I said carefully. "This morning, you told the entire company I went above and beyond." He waved his hand dismissively. "Public recognition and compensation decisions are separate things. The metrics for advancement are specific. You need to demonstrate strategic thinking, not just execution." This was the first time I'd heard anything about strategic thinking being a requirement. Every review, every check-in, every feedback session had emphasized execution and delivery. I'd built my entire approach around what he'd explicitly told me mattered. "What specific strategic initiatives were you looking for?" I asked, pulling out my phone to take notes. Sterling shifted in his chair. "It's not something you can quantify. It's a presence, a way of approaching problems. You're very tactical, Adrian. We need someone who thinks bigger picture." The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced this conversation. I asked for examples. He got vaguer. I asked what I could do differently. He suggested I observe how senior leaders operate. The meeting ended with him standing up abruptly, checking his watch, mentioning another call he had to take. I walked out feeling like I'd entered an alternate dimension. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rebecca had made dinner to celebrate, bought a decent bottle of wine, even picked up a small cake. When I told her what happened in Sterling's office, the excitement drained from her face. "That doesn't make sense," she said, which somehow made it worse because it confirmed I wasn't crazy. I spent hours replaying the conversation, trying to understand where the disconnect had happened. Every time I reviewed my notes, the contradictions became sharper. Sterling had praised my leadership in writing multiple times. He'd specifically told me the Meridian project was my chance to prove I was ready for advancement. I pulled up old emails, searching for something I'd missed, some warning sign I'd overlooked. Instead, I found a paper trail of unambiguous positive feedback. Exceptional project management. Natural leader. Exactly the kind of talent we want to develop. Around 2 in the morning, I found an email from 8 months ago where Sterling had written, "Hit these Meridian targets and we'll talk serious money." I'd hit every single target. Some I'd exceeded by double digits. Friday morning, I tried to focus on regular work, but my mind kept circling back. I had a team meeting where people congratulated me again on the Meridian success. I smiled and thanked them while thinking about how Sterling had essentially called me tactically competent but strategically limited just 24 hours after publicly celebrating my strategic leadership. During lunch, I ran into Thomas Wright, a colleague who'd been promoted to senior manager 6 months earlier. We'd started at the company around the same time, had similar backgrounds, worked on comparable projects. "Heard about Meridian," he said. "That's huge. You getting the bump?" I hesitated, then decided to test something. "Actually, Sterling said I need to demonstrate more strategic thinking. Did you have to show specific strategic initiatives for your promotion?" Thomas looked confused. "Strategic thinking? Dude, my entire review was about execution. They promoted me because I delivered 3 projects on time and under budget. That was literally the criteria." I started asking around, carefully, without making it obvious I was gathering information. Every person who'd been promoted in the last 2 years told me the same story. Deliver results, manage projects well, hit your numbers. Nobody mentioned strategic thinking or leadership presence or any of the vague criteria Sterling had introduced. By the following Monday, I'd compiled a document with every piece of feedback I'd received over 3 years. The pattern was undeniable, consistent praise for exactly the qualities Sterling now claimed I lacked. I requested a meeting with Human Resources, thinking maybe there was a formal appeals process, some way to present my case objectively. The HR coordinator, a woman named Lisa Thornton, scheduled me for Wednesday morning. "Just so you know," she said when I explained why I wanted to meet, "compensation decisions are manager discretion. We can review policy compliance, but we don't override judgment calls." Still, she seemed sympathetic, took notes, told me to bring documentation. The Wednesday morning meeting lasted 30 minutes. Lisa reviewed my performance history, looked at Sterling's written feedback, and agreed it seemed contradictory. "This is unusual," she admitted. "Your file is exemplary, but legally, managers have discretion on raises as long as they're not discriminating based on protected characteristics. Is there any reason to think this might be discriminatory?" I paused. Was there? I'm white, male, 31 years old. Sterling was also white and male. I couldn't identify an obvious protected class issue. "I don't think so," I said. "It just seems unfair." Lisa nodded sympathetically. "Fair and legal aren't always the same thing. My advice would be to document everything, ask for specific goals in writing, and give it another review cycle." Another review cycle meant 6 more months. 6 months of working under someone who'd just demonstrated he would publicly praise and privately undermine me. 6 months with no guarantee anything would change. I thanked her and left, feeling more frustrated than when I'd arrived. That afternoon, something else happened that shifted my perspective entirely. I was eating lunch in the break room when I overheard 2 women from accounting talking. They didn't know I was sitting around the corner, and their voices carried. "Did you hear about Melissa in operations? Sterling denied her promotion again." "That's 3 times now, right?" "Yeah, and she's been here longer than half the senior managers. She does everything they ask and then some." My ears perked up. I knew Melissa Cambridge. We'd worked together on a vendor audit last year. Sharp, organized, consistently excellent work. I waited until the accounting staff left, then pulled up the company directory. Started cross-referencing names of people who reported to Sterling, made a list of who'd been promoted and who hadn't. The pattern that emerged made my blood run cold. In the 3 years I'd been at Horizon, Sterling had promoted 5 people. All men, all white, all between ages 28 and 35. He'd denied promotions to 4 women, 2 people of color, and 1 guy who was 53. The guy who was 53 had quit 6 months ago. I sat with this information for 2 days, trying to decide what to do with it. Correlation isn't causation. Maybe there were legitimate reasons for every decision. Maybe I was seeing patterns that weren't there because I was angry about my own situation. But the more I thought about Melissa, about Thomas's confusion when I'd mentioned strategic thinking, about the surgical precision of Sterling's public praise versus private criticism, the more convinced I became that this was systematic. Thursday evening, I called my college roommate, Julian Fisher, who'd gone to law school and now practiced employment law in the city. "Can I run a hypothetical past you?" I asked. "Sure," Julian said. "But if this is about your job, you know I'm going to tell you it's not hypothetical." I walked him through everything, the timeline, the contradictions, the pattern I'd noticed. Julian listened without interrupting, which meant he was taking it seriously. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How documented is all of this?" he finally asked. "The praise, the promises, the reasons given. Do you have it in writing?" I told him about the emails, the performance reviews, the all-hands meeting that had been recorded. "And the pattern you noticed about promotions?" "That's in the HR system, but I only have access to limited information. I can see who got promoted and when, but not necessarily the full demographics or reasons given." Julian made a thoughtful sound. "Okay, here's what you're describing. Possible disparate treatment, potential pattern and practice discrimination, and clear documentation of contradictory evaluation criteria. That's actually a strong foundation if you wanted to pursue this. But here's what you need to understand. Once you go down this road, your relationship with this manager and possibly this company is permanently altered. You need to decide if you're willing to accept that consequence. I knew he was right. This wasn't something you could partially pursue. It was all or nothing. What would pursuing it actually look like? I asked. Julian outlined the process. Document everything meticulously. Request specific written goals and feedback. File a formal complaint with HR, citing the contradictions and pattern concerns. If that didn't resolve it, file with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Potentially sue if discrimination could be proven. It's expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining, he warned. Most cases settle, but settlement doesn't mean vindication. It means money to go away. You need to think about what outcome you actually want. What did I want? I wanted the raise I'd earned. I wanted Sterling to acknowledge he'd moved the goalposts. I wanted to know if this was really about discrimination, or if I was connecting dots that weren't connected. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course, Julian said. But don't wait too long. Document while it's fresh. And Adrian? Be careful. If Sterling's doing what you think he's doing, he's had practice covering his tracks. People like that don't react well to being challenged. That weekend, I made a decision. I wasn't ready to lawyer up or file EEOC complaints, but I was going to force Sterling to be specific, to put his vague criteria in writing where it could be examined. Monday morning, I sent him an email requesting a follow-up meeting to discuss concrete goals for the next review period. I want to make sure I understand exactly what strategic thinking and leadership presence look like in measurable terms, I wrote. Can we schedule time to define specific initiatives and outcomes that would qualify me for advancement? The email was polite, professional, and created a paper trail. Sterling responded 3 hours later, suggesting we meet the following Monday. No explanation for the delay. No acknowledgement of the request's content. Just a calendar invite. I accepted and spent the next week preparing. I created a document outlining everything I'd accomplished on Meridian, every metric I'd exceeded, every piece of positive feedback I'd received. I listed questions about how the evaluation criteria had apparently changed. I practiced staying calm and professional regardless of what he said. The Monday meeting was even worse than I'd anticipated. Sterling barely looked at my prepared document. He glanced at the first page, nodded vaguely, and launched into a monologue about company vision and market positioning that had nothing to do with my performance or promotion criteria. When I tried to redirect to specific goals, he told me I was being too focused on the mechanics and missing the bigger context. When I asked what bigger context, he said I needed to develop better instincts about organizational dynamics. When I asked how to develop those instincts, he suggested I attend some leadership workshops. Not specific ones, just workshops in general. The entire conversation was a masterclass in saying nothing while appearing to say something. I left with no concrete goals, no measurable criteria, nothing I could point to as a roadmap. But I had notes, detailed notes. And for the first time, I'd recorded the meeting on my phone. I know recording someone without consent is legally questionable in some jurisdictions. I'd checked. My state is one-party consent, meaning I can record conversations I'm part of. Still, it felt like a line I was crossing, an acknowledgement that I no longer trusted anything Sterling said unless I had proof. That recording would become crucial, but not for the reason I expected. That night, I listened to it twice, and something Sterling said in the middle of his rambling caught my attention. He'd mentioned that certain employees need more coaching than others to reach the next level, and that not everyone has the same ceiling. The phrasing was careful, but the implication was clear. He'd decided I had a ceiling, and nothing I did would change his mind. I'd been working harder trying to meet unspecified standards while he'd already determined I wasn't promotion material. The realization was both liberating and infuriating. This wasn't about my performance. It never had been. Wednesday afternoon, I scheduled coffee with Melissa Cambridge. I told her I was trying to understand promotion criteria and thought she might have insight since she'd been at the company longer. We met at a cafe 2 blocks from the office. Melissa was cautious at first, giving standard answers about working hard and being patient. But when I mentioned I'd also been passed over by Sterling despite hitting all my goals, something shifted in her expression. You too? She said quietly. How many times? I asked. She stirred her coffee, looking tired. 3 promotion cycles. Every time he has different reasons. First time, I needed more client-facing experience, so I led the Northbrook account redesign. Second time, I needed to demonstrate technical depth, so I got certified in 2 systems and trained half the department. Third time, he said I was too focused on my own work and needed to show more collaboration. She laughed bitterly. I'd literally created the collaboration framework our entire division uses. Did he ever put these reasons in writing? I asked. Melissa shook her head. That's the thing. It's always verbal, always vague, always in private. But in team meetings, he praises my work constantly. Other managers ask him why I'm not senior leadership yet, and he talks about budget constraints or timing, never the reasons he tells me. I felt a chill. This was exactly my experience, beat for beat. Have you talked to HR? She nodded. Twice. They say it's manager discretion. They asked if I thought it was discrimination. I said maybe. I'm a woman, I'm Asian American, I'm 41. Could be any of those. Could be all of them. But I can't prove it. Sterling's too careful. He never says anything explicitly discriminatory. It's all coded language and subjective criteria. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Melissa leaned forward. Adrian, there's something else. I heard through the grapevine that the department's getting restructured next quarter. New positions being created at senior levels. Sterling's going to fill them with his chosen people. If we're not in that group now, we never will be. The restructuring news changed the timeline completely. If new senior positions were being created and Sterling was already deciding who'd fill them, I had maybe 6 weeks to do something before getting permanently frozen out. That evening, I called Julian again. I need to file something formal, I told him. Not a lawsuit yet, but an official complaint. What's my best option? Julian walked me through it. I could file an internal complaint with HR citing pattern discrimination, which would trigger an investigation. Or I could file with the EEOC, which was external, but took months. The challenge, Julian explained, is that you need either explicit evidence of discrimination or a pattern strong enough that inference becomes reasonable. Do you have emails where Sterling uses discriminatory language? Witnesses who heard him say something problematic? I didn't. Everything Sterling did was carefully worded, plausibly deniable. Then you're looking at pattern and practice. You'd need to show systematic exclusion of protected groups. That means data, multiple complainants ideally, and statistical analysis. It's doable, but harder. I made a decision that probably violated company policy and possibly some laws. I needed data, and I was going to get it. I had access to parts of the HR system through my role managing project teams. I wasn't supposed to pull reports on the entire division's promotion history, but the system didn't technically prevent it. Thursday night, working from home after Rebecca went to bed, I generated reports showing every promotion, denial, and transfer in Sterling's division for the past 5 years. I included demographics where available, gender, age based on start dates, and ethnicity, where it was listed in the system for voluntary EEO reporting. The data was stark. Sterling had managed approximately 60 people over 5 years. He'd promoted 11. All 11 were white men under 40. He'd passed over 23 people at various points. 18 were women, people of color, or over 50. 5 were white men under 40 who'd been promoted after 1 or 2 review cycles. The disparity was statistical-wise significant even to my non-expert eyes. I printed the reports, saved encrypted copies to 3 different locations, including a cloud service Sterling couldn't access, and put the physical copies in a folder at home. Then I did something else Julian had suggested. I started documenting everything in real time. Every conversation with Sterling got summarized in an email I sent to myself from my personal account. Every meeting got recorded if legally permissible. Every piece of feedback, every project assignment, every casual comment got logged. I created a timeline document that was now 20 pages long. If this turned into a legal case, I wanted overwhelming documentation. And if Sterling was as practiced at this as I suspected, I knew he'd try to construct a different narrative once challenged. My documentation would counter that. The following week, something happened that accelerated everything. A guy named Kevin Ashford from Sterling's team put in his 2-week notice. Kevin was 51, had been at Horizon for 8 years, and was one of the most competent program managers in the division. I'd worked with him on several projects, and he was universally respected. His departure was sudden enough that people noticed. I caught him in the parking lot one evening. Sorry to hear you're leaving, I said. Big opportunity somewhere else? Kevin gave me a long look, then seemed to make a decision. Can we talk off the record? We sat in his car. Kevin told me he'd been passed over for promotion 4 times in 3 years. Each time, Sterling had different reasons. Too specialized, not specialized enough, great with details but needed to think bigger picture, too focused on strategy at the expense of execution. It was like whiplash, Kevin said. I finally realized he was never going to promote me regardless of what I did, so I'm going somewhere that values experience. Did you ever figure out why? I asked carefully. Kevin hesitated. I think I'm too old. Sterling wants rising stars, young guys he can mold and who'll credit him for their success. People my age, we've been around too long, we question things, we don't worship at his altar. So we're liabilities. He paused. There's something else. About 2 years ago, I overheard Sterling talking to Diana Ross from corporate HR at a conference. This was before they realized I was nearby. Sterling was complaining about having too many diversity hires he had to work around in his division. Diana told him he needed to be careful about documentation. He laughed and said he was always careful. That's why nothing ever stuck. I felt my heart rate spike. Did you report that? Kevin shook his head. Who would I report it to? Diana's the corporate HR executive. Sterling's her peer. And I didn't record it. I just overheard it. It'd be my word against his, and he'd deny it. I decided staying was pointless. But Adrian, if you're thinking about challenging him, you should know what you're up against. That conversation convinced me I wasn't paranoid or oversensitive. Sterling had a system, and he'd been running it successfully for years because he'd learned how to avoid leaving evidence. But he'd also gotten comfortable, maybe overconfident, and he'd never dealt with someone who documented everything as obsessively as I now was. The next Monday, I filed a formal written complaint with Lisa Thornton in HR. The complaint was 5 pages long, single-spaced, with attachments. I detailed the contradictory feedback, the pattern I'd observed in promotions, Melissa's similar experiences, Kevin's overheard conversation, and the statistical breakdown of Sterling's promotion decisions. I cited specific company policies about equitable evaluation and advancement opportunities. I requested a formal investigation. Lisa read it while I sat there. When she finished, she looked uncomfortable. "This is serious, Adrian. Once I submit this, it triggers protocols. There'll be an investigation. Sterling will be questioned. This will likely become adversarial." I nodded. "I understand, but I don't think I have another choice." The investigation began immediately. Lisa told me she had to notify Sterling within 24 hours that a formal complaint had been filed, though she wouldn't share my identity initially. That protection lasted exactly 1 day before Sterling called me into his office with a vague excuse about project updates. He closed the door, and I could see from his expression that he knew. "I heard there's been some confusion about performance feedback," he said carefully. "I want to make sure we're aligned on expectations going forward." The phrasing was so deliberately neutral it was almost funny. "I've been very clear about my performance and your feedback," I replied, matching his careful tone. "I've simply asked for consistency and documentation." His jaw tightened slightly. "Sometimes employees misunderstand the complexity of promotion decisions. It's not personal, Adrian. It's about organizational needs and readiness." I didn't take the bait, just nodded and said I trusted the HR process would clarify everything. He didn't like that answer. The meeting ended abruptly. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 things happened that made me realize I'd kicked a hornet's nest. First, I started getting excluded from meetings I'd normally attend. Second, projects I'd been leading got reassigned to other team members with vague explanations about rebalancing workload. Third, my work product started getting scrutinized at a level it never had before. Minor formatting issues became major discussions. Small bugs that would normally get fixed in testing became examples of quality control problems. I documented all of it. Every email, every meeting cancellation, every criticism. I also started keeping a detailed work log showing exactly what I was doing and when, so there'd be a record contradicting any narrative that my performance had declined. It was exhausting and paranoid, but I'd read enough employment law cases to know that retaliation was common and often worked because people couldn't prove the timing wasn't coincidental. The HR investigation moved slowly, which Lisa warned me was normal. They were interviewing people, reviewing records, consulting with corporate employment counsel. Meanwhile, I'd reached out to 5 other current and former employees of Sterling's division who I thought might have similar experiences. 3 agreed to talk. 2 were still at the company and terrified of retaliation, but willing to submit confidential statements to HR. 1 was a woman named Veronica Hayes, who'd left Horizon 2 years earlier after being passed over for promotion repeatedly. "I should have fought harder," she told me over the phone. "But I had 2 kids and a mortgage, and I couldn't risk getting fired, so I found another job and left." Sterling gave me a glowing reference, which felt like hush money, like he knew he'd been unfair, but also knew I wouldn't do anything about it. I asked if she'd be willing to provide a statement now. She agreed. Her documentation from her time at Horizon was meticulous and damning. Same pattern of public praise, private dismissal, constantly changing criteria. In week 3 of the investigation, I got called in for what Lisa described as a preliminary discussion with her and Daniel Foster, the corporate HR legal counsel. Daniel was mid-50s, gray hair, expensive suit, and the kind of neutral expression that comes from years of managing workplace disputes. "Mr. Pearson," he began, "we've reviewed your complaint and conducted preliminary interviews. I want to be direct with you about what we've found and what options exist." I braced myself. Daniel continued. "There's clear evidence of inconsistent feedback and evaluation criteria in your case. There's also evidence suggesting a pattern in promotion decisions that raises questions. However, proving intentional discrimination versus unconscious bias or poor management practices is extremely difficult. Mr. Sterling maintains that all his decisions were based on legitimate business reasons and his professional judgment." I felt frustration rising. "So nothing happens? If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this." Daniel held up a hand. "I didn't say that. We take these concerns seriously. Here's what we're prepared to offer. First, your next performance review will be conducted by Sterling's manager, not Sterling himself. Second, we'll provide you with a written development plan with specific, measurable goals for advancement consideration. Third, we'll offer you a lateral transfer to a different division if you prefer, with no negative impact on your record. And fourth, we'll conduct mandatory management training for the entire senior leadership team on equitable evaluation practices." He paused. "Additionally, we're prepared to offer you a one-time retention bonus of $15,000 and a salary increase of 8%, effective immediately." I stared at him. "That's the raise I was originally promised." Daniel didn't blink. "Consider it a recognition of your Meridian work and our commitment to fair compensation." It was hush money. I understood that immediately. They were giving me what I'd asked for originally, plus some face-saving measures, in exchange for dropping this before it became a bigger problem. "And what happens to Sterling?" I asked. Daniel's expression didn't change. "Personnel matters regarding Mr. Sterling are confidential, but I can tell you that this investigation will remain in his file. He'll be subject to additional oversight on promotion decisions, and he's been placed on a management improvement plan." A management improvement plan was corporate speak for, "you're on thin ice." It wasn't termination, but it was a permanent black mark. I asked for time to think about it. Daniel said I had 72 hours. The meeting ended. I walked out feeling like I'd won something, but also like I'd been bought off, and I couldn't decide which feeling was stronger. That night, Rebecca and I had the most honest conversation we'd had in months. I laid out everything: the offer, the implications, what accepting would mean, what fighting further would involve. If I accept this, I said, Sterling gets a slap on the wrist, and the pattern continues for whoever comes after me. If I push for more, I might get nothing. I'll definitely make enemies, and we're talking months or years of legal battle with no guaranteed outcome. Rebecca listened, then said something I didn't expect. What about Melissa and Veronica? And the next person Sterling decides isn't good enough? She was right. This was bigger than my raise. I'd stumbled into a system that had been quietly crushing people for years, and I had a chance to expose it. Not perfectly, not with guaranteed success, but a real chance. I called Julian that night. If I reject their offer and push for a full investigation or EEOC filing, what am I really looking at? Julian was quiet for a moment. You're looking at months of stress, possible termination disguised as layoffs or performance issues, legal fees if they fight hard, and maybe a settlement or verdict that changes things. Most importantly, you're looking at forcing them to take this seriously because you won't go away quietly. I made my decision. Wednesday morning, I sent Daniel Foster an email declining their offer and requesting that the investigation continue with expanded scope to examine Sterling's full history of promotion decisions and potential pattern discrimination. I cited specific EEOC guidelines and case law Julian had helped me research. I stated that I was prepared to file an external complaint if the internal investigation wasn't thorough. IBCCED Julian on the email. The response was swift and hostile, though carefully worded to maintain corporate politeness. Daniel called me 2 hours later. Mr. Pearson, I'd strongly encourage you to reconsider. The offer we made was generous and represents a good faith effort to resolve your concerns. Rejecting it and escalating will be time-consuming and potentially difficult for everyone involved. I told him my decision was final. The call ended coldly. By that afternoon, I'd received a meeting invitation for the following Monday with Sterling, Daniel, and Sterling's manager, Richard Novak, the VP of Operations. The subject line was performance discussion and expectations. The weekend before that meeting was surreal. I knew they were going to try to either intimidate me into backing down or build a case for termination. I spent both days preparing with Julian, who'd agreed to represent me formally if things escalated to litigation. We practiced responses to various scenarios. They might offer you more money, Julian warned, or they might present you with a performance improvement plan designed to be impossible to complete, setting up grounds for termination. Either way, stay calm, take notes, commit to nothing in the moment. He coached me on phrases to use. I'd like to review that and respond in writing. Can you provide that feedback in writing so I can address it specifically? I need time to consider this before responding. The goal was to be professional, cooperative, and absolutely unwilling to be pressured into quick decisions. I also prepared a folder with printed copies of every document I'd collected, my own documentation, the statistical analysis, statements from Melissa and Veronica, the recording of Sterling's vague promotion criteria meeting, everything. Monday morning, I walked into the conference room where Richard Novak, Daniel Foster, Sterling, and Lisa Thornton from HR were waiting. The setup was designed to be intimidating. Me on one side of the table, 4 of them on the other. Richard opened the meeting. Adrian, we're here to discuss some concerns that have been raised and to ensure we're all aligned moving forward. What followed was 90 minutes of the most sophisticated workplace intimidation I'd ever experienced. They started by acknowledging my Meridian work was good, but pointing out areas where it had supposedly fallen short. Sterling had prepared a document, conveniently created in the past week, listing quality issues, communication gaps, and timeline delays on the project. Almost all of it was either exaggerated or fabricated. When I pushed back with specific counter-evidence, Richard said perception was reality, and if stakeholders felt there were issues, that was what mattered. They then presented a performance improvement plan with 12 specific goals to be achieved in 90 days. The goals were absurd, simultaneous requirements to be more strategic and more detail-oriented, to take more initiative and to collaborate more extensively, to work faster and with higher quality. It was designed to be impossible. I didn't sign the performance improvement plan in the meeting. I told them I needed to review it with a clear head and would respond within the business week. Daniel's face tightened. This is time-sensitive, Adrian. We need your commitment to these improvements. I maintained the script Julian had coached me on. I understand the urgency, but this is a significant document that impacts my career. I need appropriate time to review it. The meeting ended tensely. As I was leaving, Sterling caught up with me in the hallway. This doesn't have to be difficult, he said quietly. You're making choices that hurt your future here. I'm trying to help you succeed. The gaslighting was almost impressive. He'd systematically undermined me, was now participating in constructing grounds for my termination, and was framing himself as helpful. I looked at him directly. I'm going to respond to the PIP in writing by Friday. I assume that's sufficient? He studied my face, maybe looking for cracks in my composure, then nodded and walked away. That week, Julian and I drafted a response to the performance improvement plan that was part acceptance, part rebuttal, and part documentation of the retaliation. We agreed to work on the stated goals, but noted specific instances where the criticism was contradicted by prior feedback. We requested that all future feedback be provided in writing with specific examples. We noted the timing between my complaint and the sudden discovery of performance issues. We didn't use the word retaliation explicitly, but the implication was clear. I also attached a timeline showing how my work assignments had changed, my access had been limited, and my responsibilities had been reduced since filing the complaint, all of which made completing the PIP goals harder. I submitted the response Friday at noon via email to all 4 people who'd been in the meeting, again, BCC-ing Julian. The email created a record and made clear I wasn't going to be quietly managed out. The next month was psychological warfare disguised as normal business operations. Every piece of work I submitted got returned with extensive revision requests. Meetings I scheduled got rescheduled or relocated without notice. I was excluded from a major client presentation I'd been preparing for weeks, told at the last minute that Sterling thought a different approach would be better. My team members started getting pulled into private conversations with Sterling that they couldn't tell me about. 2 people from my Meridian team requested transfers to other projects. The isolation was intentional and effective, but I kept documenting. Every email, every changed assignment, every exclusion, every impossible request got logged with timestamps and context. I was building an archive of retaliation that would be hard to explain away as coincidental, and I made sure to keep performing, not perfectly, because the PIP was designed to be unachievable, but well enough that any termination would look suspicious. In week 5 of the PIP, something broke my way. Melissa Cambridge filed her own HR complaint. She'd been watching my situation, had seen the retaliation, and decided she was done staying quiet. Her complaint was even more detailed than mine because she'd been documenting for longer. She had 3 years of notes, emails, and evidence of the same pattern I'd identified. When HR realized they had 2 formal complaints with overlapping allegations and evidence, they had to escalate. Daniel Foster called me on a Wednesday afternoon. Mr. Pearson, in light of recent developments, we're conducting an expanded review of the concerns you and another employee have raised. During this review, you'll be temporarily reassigned to work on special projects reporting directly to Richard Novak rather than Mr. Sterling. The performance improvement plan is suspended pending completion of the review. It wasn't vindication, but it was acknowledgement that they couldn't just steamroll me anymore. The reassignment to work under Richard was initially uncomfortable. Richard had been part of the intimidation meeting, and I didn't trust him. But within a week, I realized the situation was more complex than I'd thought. Richard called me into his office for a private conversation. "Off the record," he said, "I didn't know the extent of what Sterling was doing until your complaint forced us to look closely. I've been reviewing his division's numbers, and the patterns are troubling. I'm not going to promise you a specific outcome, but I want you to know this is being taken seriously at levels above my head." I didn't know whether to believe him, but his tone was different, less corporate, more human. "What happens to the people he's already passed over?" I asked. Richard sighed. "That's complicated. But between us, I think this is bigger than one bad manager. I think it's about whether Horizon has actual accountability." The expanded investigation took 2 months. During that time, 2 more employees came forward. 1 current, 1 former. The statistical analysis got handed to an outside consulting firm specializing in employment equity. They found what I'd found, but with more rigorous methodology and frightening clarity. Sterling had managed 93 people over 7 years. His promotion rate for white men under 40 was 61%. His promotion rate for everyone else was 9%. The consultants ran regression analyses controlling for performance metrics, tenure, and education. Even accounting for those factors, the disparity was statistically significant to a level that suggested systematic bias. Their report was damning. It didn't prove intentional discrimination in legal terms, but it showed a pattern no reasonable company could ignore. In month 3, things happened quickly. Sterling was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's conclusion. An external investigator interviewed 17 current and former employees. The investigator also reviewed 7 years of performance reviews, promotion decisions, and HR records. They found that Sterling had consistently rated women and minorities lower on subjective criteria like leadership potential and strategic thinking, while rating them similarly to white men on objective metrics like technical skills and project delivery. The pattern was clear. When criteria were measurable, everyone performed similarly. When criteria were subjective, white men got better evaluations. This was textbook disparate treatment, even if Sterling never said anything explicitly discriminatory. The investigator's report recommended Sterling's termination and a comprehensive review of promotion practices across the company. The Monday afternoon, I got called into a meeting with Richard Novak and someone I'd never met, Catherine Green, Horizon's chief people officer from corporate headquarters. Catherine was direct. "Mr. Pearson, we've completed our investigation into your complaints and related concerns. I want to thank you for bringing these issues to our attention and for your patience during the review process. We've found substantial evidence supporting your allegations regarding inconsistent evaluation criteria and problematic patterns in promotion decisions. Based on these findings, we're taking several actions." She outlined them systematically. Sterling was being terminated for cause effective immediately. His severance was being reduced to the minimum contractually required. The company was conducting a comprehensive audit of promotion decisions in all divisions. Every employee who'd been denied promotion under Sterling would have their cases independently reviewed. Anyone found to have been improperly passed over would receive retroactive raises, back pay, and priority consideration for current openings. Additionally, Catherine continued, we're offering you a formal promotion to senior program manager, effective immediately, with a 38% salary increase and a $25,000 settlement to cover the emotional distress and professional impact you've experienced. You'll report directly to Richard Novak. Your performance improvement plan is being formally rescinded and removed from your record, and we're prepared to provide you with a written letter of apology and commendation for your professionalism throughout this process. She paused. We're also implementing mandatory bias training for all managers and restructuring our promotion evaluation system to include more objective criteria and oversight. This should have been done years ago. Your willingness to speak up has driven change that will benefit many people. I sat there processing. This was more than I'd expected. Real consequences, real changes, real acknowledgement. What about Melissa? I asked. Catherine nodded. Ms. Cambridge is receiving similar remediation. She's being promoted to operations director with a corresponding salary adjustment and settlement. The next day, Sterling's termination was announced to the company. The announcement was carefully worded, pursuing other opportunities effective immediately, but everyone who mattered knew what it meant. People started coming up to me, some thanking me quietly, some asking what had happened, some keeping their distance because I'd become that person who'd challenged management and won, which made me either a hero or a troublemaker depending on perspective. Melissa and I got coffee that afternoon. We did it, she said, still seeming disbelieving. I thought I'd be stuck forever. We talked about the people who'd left, the years they'd spent being undermined, how many careers Sterling had stunted or ended. Our win felt good, but incomplete. We'd stopped him, but we couldn't undo the damage to everyone who'd already left. 6 months later, I'm settled into the senior role. Richard turned out to be a decent manager, direct, fair, willing to own mistakes. The promotion review system was genuinely overhauled with rubrics and multiple evaluators and transparency. 3 other people from Sterling's old division got promoted in the first cycle under the new system. The culture didn't change overnight, but the message was clear. The old way of doing things wasn't acceptable anymore. I still document everything obsessively, a habit I suspect I'll never lose. I keep in touch with Melissa, Veronica, and Kevin, who I've heard is thriving at his new company. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken that first settlement offer, the $15,000 and 8% raise and quiet resolution. I probably would have left Horizon within a year, carrying the frustration but none of the vindication. The hardest part, surprisingly, has been managing the reputation that came with all this. Some people see me as the guy who stood up to a bad manager and changed things. Others see me as the troublemaker who got someone fired, regardless of whether Sterling deserved it. I've had to learn to live with that ambiguity, to accept that doing the right thing doesn't mean universal approval. Rebecca tells me I'm overthinking it, that anyone who matters knows what actually happened. She's probably right. I've also had 3 people from other divisions reach out privately to ask about filing complaints against their managers. I walked them through what I learned, connected them with Julian, shared my documentation template. I don't know if they'll follow through, it's a brutal process, but they have the information if they need it. Looking back at the all-hands meeting where Sterling praised my Meridian work in front of everyone, then the closed-door conversation hours later, where he denied the promised raise with contradictory justifications, I understand now what I was too shocked to see then. He never intended to promote me. The public praise was performance, maintaining his image as a supportive manager. The private denial was the truth of his evaluation. He'd done this enough times that he'd perfected the disconnect, learned exactly how to make people feel valued publicly while systematically limiting them privately. What he hadn't accounted for was someone documenting the contradiction, refusing to accept vague explanations, and being willing to endure retaliation long enough to force accountability. Sterling's mistake wasn't being biased. Plenty of biased managers survive. His mistake was getting comfortable enough to be sloppy, to assume nobody would notice the patterns or fight back effectively. I still think about that Monday afternoon in his office when he told me I lacked strategic thinking after publicly celebrating my strategic leadership the same morning. That moment crystallized something important. When someone contradicts themselves that completely, it's not confusion or miscommunication. It's a deliberate strategy to keep you off balance, questioning yourself instead of them. The best thing I did was stop trying to understand his logic and start documenting his contradictions. You can't reason with a system designed to be unreasonable. You can only expose it. The company issued a statement 3 months ago announcing improved diversity in senior promotions and reduced disparity in advancement rates. They didn't mention Sterling or the investigation, but the connection was obvious to anyone paying attention. I'd like to think Horizon learned something meaningful, that this wasn't just damage control, but genuine institutional change. Time will tell. What I know for certain is that Melissa's leading a major strategic initiative. Veronica got offered her job back at a senior level and accepted, and I'm doing work that challenges me with a manager who evaluates fairly. 3 careers that would have been stunted or ended are thriving instead. If you're reading this because you're in a similar situation, getting public praise but private dismissal, meeting goals that keep changing, watching less qualified people advance while you stagnate, document everything. Don't assume the contradiction is your fault or your misunderstanding. Don't assume the system will self-correct. And don't assume being excellent at your job is enough when someone's already decided you don't fit their vision. Get a lawyer early, even if you don't file immediately. Know your rights. Build your case while still doing great work. Give them no legitimate reason to remove you while collecting evidence of illegitimate reasons. It's exhausting. It's unfair that victims have to do all this work, but it's effective. The final piece of advice I'd give: decide early what outcome you can live with. If you want your job and fair treatment, fight for that specifically. If you want the person gone, be prepared for a longer battle. If you want systemic change, understand that even winning won't fix everything. I wanted the raise I'd earned and acknowledgement that I'd been treated unfairly. I got both, plus Sterling's termination and company-wide policy changes. But I also got months of stress, damaged professional relationships, and a reputation that's complicated at best. It was worth it for me. Only you can decide if it's worth it for you. Sterling never apologized. I didn't expect him to. Men who build careers on undermining people rarely acknowledge what they've done. He's working somewhere else now, probably running similar patterns with better plausible deniability. That bothers me some days. Other days, I remind myself that I can't fix every broken system, but I fixed the one I was trapped in. That has to be enough. The moment I knew I'd really won wasn't getting the promotion or the settlement. It was 3 weeks ago when a woman from Sterling's old team, someone I barely knew, stopped me in the hallway. "I got promoted," she said quietly. "Under the new system, with the new criteria. It was transparent and fair, and I earned it." She paused. "That wouldn't have happened under Sterling, so thank you." I told her she'd earned it herself, which was true, but I understood what she meant. Sterling would have found reasons, vague, subjective, impossible to counter, why she wasn't ready. The new system didn't eliminate bias entirely, but it made it harder to hide. That conversation mattered more than any apology from Sterling ever could. I'm still at Horizon Solutions. Some people ask why I stayed after everything. The honest answer is complicated. Part inertia, part vindication, part genuine opportunity in the new role, part wanting to prove I could thrive in the environment I fought to change. Leaving would have felt like letting Sterling win retroactively, like admitting the place was irredeemable. Staying means dealing with complicated feelings and occasional awkward encounters with people who were loyal to Sterling. But it also means seeing the changes stick, mentoring people who might have been Sterling's next victims, and knowing that speaking up actually mattered. That's worth the discomfort. The title of this story in my head has always been about contradictions, public praise, private betrayal. But maybe the real story is about what happens when you refuse to accept the contradiction, when you insist that words and actions align, when you demand that the system work the way it claims to. Sterling operated for years because people either didn't notice the pattern or didn't have the resources to fight. I happened to be in a position where I could document, could afford a lawyer, could survive retaliation long enough to see it through. That's privilege, even if it doesn't feel like it when you're in the middle of the battle. I try to use that awareness to help others who don't have the same advantages. Because the people Sterling hurt most were the ones who couldn't afford to fight back. The recording I made of Sterling's vague promotion criteria meeting, I never had to use it in any formal proceeding, but knowing I had it gave me confidence to keep pushing. Sometimes the evidence you collect matters more for what it does to your own certainty than for what it proves to others. I knew I wasn't imagining the contradiction. I had proof, even if I never needed to present it publicly. That certainty is what carried me through the hardest parts of the investigation when they were trying to make me doubt my own judgment. Trust your documentation, trust your instincts when they're backed by evidence, and trust that systems can change when enough people refuse to accept dysfunction as normal. 6 months from now, Horizon's doing another round of senior promotions. I'll be on the evaluation panel, helping ensure the new criteria are applied consistently. It's strange to be on the other side of the process, to have influence over decisions that will shape careers. I think about Sterling sometimes in those meetings, how he must have sat in similar rooms, making choices that stunted people's growth while convincing himself he was being objective. I wonder if he ever questioned his own biases, or if he genuinely believed his subjective assessments were merit-based. I'll never know. What I do know is that having been through what I went through makes me hyper-aware of how easy it is to let unexamined preferences masquerade as professional judgment. I overcompensate now, probably, insisting on documentation and explicit criteria and multiple perspectives. My colleagues tease me about it sometimes. I don't care. I've seen what happens when managers trust their gut without accountability. They say you can't fight City Hall. They say the system always wins. They say employees who challenge management get blacklisted and destroyed. Sometimes that's true. But sometimes, when you document everything, when you find allies, when you refuse to be quietly managed out, when you make it more expensive for them to fight than to fix the problem, sometimes you actually win. Not perfectly, not without cost, but genuinely. Sterling lost his job. Multiple people got promoted who would have been passed over. Company policy changed. Those are real victories even if they came with scars. The raise Sterling denied me that afternoon? It was never about the money. It was about respect, recognition, and the promise that hard work matters. When he denied it using reasons that contradicted everything he'd said publicly, He wasn't just rejecting my request, he was telling me my perception of reality was wrong, that his assessment mattered more than measurable results, that I should accept his judgment without question. Refusing that dynamic, insisting that words mean things and promises matter. That's what this was really about. The money was just the symbol. The principle was everything. If I could go back to that moment in his office, knowing everything that would follow, the investigation, the retaliation, the stress, the eventual vindication, would I still push back? Absolutely. Some battles choose you. This one chose me the moment Sterling decided I was someone he could publicly praise and privately diminish. He made a calculation that I'd accept the contradiction quietly. He was wrong, and that miscalculation changed more than just my career. It changed the trajectory for everyone he would have undermined going forward. That's not nothing. That matters. The story doesn't end here. It ends every day I walk into work and see the systems actually functioning more fairly, every time someone gets promoted on merit instead of politics, every instance where bias gets caught and corrected instead of ignored. Sterling's gone, but the culture he operated in still exists in fragments. Changing that completely will take years and constant vigilance. But it's changing, incrementally, because people like Melissa and Veronica and me refuse to let the old patterns continue unchallenged. We're not heroes. We're just people who got tired of accepting dysfunction as inevitable. So yeah. My boss praised my work publicly, then denied me a raise privately using completely different reasons. And when I refused to accept that contradiction, everything changed. Not instantly, not easily, but genuinely. If you're in that situation now, know this. You're not crazy. The contradiction is real, and you have more power than they want you to believe. Document everything. Find allies. Know your worth. And don't let anyone convince you that their words and actions can contradict indefinitely without consequence. Sometimes the consequence is you walk away with your integrity intact. Sometimes the consequence is they get exposed and removed. Either way, you deserve better than public praise paired with private betrayal. Demand better. Fight for better. And if they won't give it willingly, make them pay the price for refusing. Justice doesn't always show up on its own. Sometimes you have to drag it into the light yourself, one documented email at a time. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.